Hey, it's Edward Stevens with the Stevens Group at Reese Nichols. Thank you so much for joining me again. Class is in session, kids. Grab a seat. I need you to get a number 2 pencil out, clean sheet of paper. Tonight we're going to talk about appraisals. Now, maybe appraisals are not the sexiest part about buying a home or selling a home, but there's a lot you need to know when it comes to appraisals if you want to have a successful purchase or a successful sale. And if you're not using a real estate agent, then you're taking it upon yourself to know all the ins and outs of appraisals. Appraisals, we're going to talk tonight about what are appraisals, when do you order appraisals, what is the cost of an appraisal. We're going to talk about some of the tactics that I use from a negotiating standpoint to help you, whether you're selling or you're buying, specifically negotiating that appraisal. So let's jump right into it. Appraisal. Is an assessment that is important. It's an objective look at the value of the home that you're buying, or if you're selling the home, it's an objective look at the value of the home you're selling. The key word is objective. It doesn't matter whether you're the seller or you're the buyer. You're getting your information up until the appraisal happens. You're getting your information from an agent or a lender or somebody who has a dog in the fight, somebody who's got a commission at stake. And so you have to consider the source, just like I always tell you guys, consider the source. And I had a person today ask me, hey, is now a good time to buy a home? I asked them to consider the source. They're asking me, I'm a real estate agent. Most real estate agents are going to tell you now is a good time to buy a home because our commissions depend on you buying homes. But it's the same sort of thing. I mean, I want to be open and honest with people, but at the same time, you ask a person, who sells gloves, if it's going to be cold outside tomorrow, they're going to be telling you it's going to be cold enough to wear a pair of gloves. It's just pretty obvious. With appraisals, you are going to have an objective person come out and give you the value of your home. And there's going to be a cost to that, and it's going to be a requirement as well. The cost for an appraisal is dependent upon the lender. It's dependent upon the size of the home. It's sometimes dependent upon the appraisal firm. But if you can bank on about $500, expect $500, okay? It could be more, could be less, but it's not going to be anything too different from that. I know that when we sold homes over $1 million, sometimes these appraisals have to happen twice. They have 2 independent people come out. Or maybe there'll be some lenders that have 2 independent appraisals come out for higher luxury homes. But most of the time, that's not the case. In an appraisal, which is going to cost you about $500, what the appraiser is going to be looking for is they're going to be looking for the condition. They're going to be looking at the condition. And they're going to be looking at market conditions. I should say condition, I should say of home. And they're going to be looking at safety concerns. They're going to be looking at habitability. Concerns. And they're going to be looking at comparable sales. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the 5 things they'll be looking for. Condition of the home. So they're going to come in and take pictures of the inside of the home. This is not, in most cases, a drive-by appraisal. The appraisals we're talking about for the purpose of this video is the appraisals for purchasing and selling. So I want to make the distinction between appraisals of these kind versus the appraisals that you get for refinancing or the appraisals that you get for your county taxes. That's not what we're talking about. When it comes to the kind where you're buying a home and you get an appraisal, they want to know the condition of the home. They're going to take photos of the inside of the home, outside of the home. Is the siding falling off, right? Is there a hole kicked in the wall? Is the carpet peed on because you have a dog that you haven't trained? Those sorts of things, okay? They're also going to look at, as well as like updates. You know, did you put nice granite countertops and one of those beautiful backsplashes in? Or are you just rolling with whatever the builder put in your home in the late 90s? That's the question, right? Next, they are going to look at market conditions. They want to know, is the market typically going up, or is it going down, or is it sideways? They're going to be able to look at statistics nationwide and then also in a smaller geographic area to be able to make that determination. Can't affect that. You can change this, but you can't change this. Safety concerns would be things like, sometimes they'll point out things like a handrail may need to be installed because they feel like it may be a safety concern for somebody trying to climb stairs outside. Or installing what they call a GFCI outlet. It's a special type of outlet that you'll put near a water supply or water source, so that if you've got one hand in the sink in the kitchen and you go to plug in your toaster, the GFCI outlet's supposed to be able to help you so that you don't get electrocuted, stuff like that. You know, they're going to be looking for little safety things like that. And we'll get into in a minute which types of loans require a more stringent appraisal and which ones are a little bit more lax. So we've talked about those three. Habitability concerns would be things like, you know, if there is a problem with the foundation, if there's water in the basement when the appraiser comes out, they're going to be noting that. It may not be a safety concern, but it may be something to do with the habitability. I've seen appraisers point out roofs that are, you know, could potentially leak. Again, not a safety concern, but it's more of a habitability concern. And finally, and maybe most importantly, are the comparable sales. So they want to know what has been happening in this neighborhood in the last 365 days. Have homes sold? How many have sold? What's the price of the homes that have sold? And compared to yours and your price, does it make sense? Okay. If you've got a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home that's 2,500 square feet with a beautifully manicured half-acre lot, does your price line up with the prices of the other homes that have sold that are similar to yours? Okay. Also, one more note about that is they're typically looking in the last 365 days. So I've seen them look further back if they have to, but you're going to be safe to assume that they're looking at the last 365 days. And so when you go to make your bid on a home, it helps as a buyer to make sure that you're looking at the same data that the appraiser is going to be looking at. So if you got a good buyer's agent, your buyer's agent should be able to tell you, hey, this is what the appraiser is probably going to be looking at. These are the 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 homes that the appraisal is probably going to show. And you might as well look at it up front and make an offer based on that data. And that way there's not going to be a surprise. The appraisal itself will be a multi-page report, and it's going to show you your home compared to every other home that they found was relevant, basically. And then at the very end, he's going to say, you know, based on this, you know, your home at the very last page, it's going to say your home is valued at X. And whatever that number is, that's what he came up with. The appraisal is done by somebody who actually has the sales contract. So let's talk about timeline. When is an appraisal actually ordered? You know, most people, when you're buying a home, you don't want to spend money where you don't have to. And you kind of set up the contract so that you don't spend any more money than you have to move to the next step. So your commitment to the home is gradual. You start by submitting an earnest money deposit. That's your first time that you made a payment. That's the first time you've committed financially. Then the next time is you've done some inspections. You've shelled out more money. Next time will be you're going to order an appraisal. Like now you're 3 steps in. You've made 3 separate financial commitments to this home, right? And so a lot of people choose not to order their appraisal right away. They'd rather go ahead and do all their inspections first. If something comes up in the inspections and turns out they don't buy the house, then there's no reason to burn $500 or whatever dollars it is. And most of the time, that's how the buyer wants this to play out, so that you're not spending money unnecessarily. When the appraisal is ordered and the appraiser comes out to the home to take his pictures, to do his analysis, he will have a copy of the contract. So he will know that you're buying the home for $300,000. He will know what concessions you have made, what concessions the seller has made. So I get asked this question a lot. Why is it so often that I'm buying a home for $300,000 and the appraiser, who is, supposed to be objective, more often than not is coming up with his last page of the appraisal saying this home is worth exactly $300,000. Like, statistically, what are the odds that he would land on exactly $300,000 if we had agreed previously? Like, is that a coincidence? It's not a coincidence. Come on. At the end of the day, I love appraisers, but I mean, everybody's there. Some people are just punching the clock. I mean, let's be real. So if it makes sense on paper, he might not. He might just kind of wing this thing and say, hey, here's your $300,000 appraisal. I can't control that. You can't control that. You can basically sit there and hope that the person does a good job and is objective, but sometimes people just push it through. And that's just the sad truth of it. Appraisals are typically ordered. I've seen them ordered as late as maybe 10, 14 days prior to closing. It may take them a couple weeks to get the appraisal done, get it processed, get it back to the lender, and get it back to you if you're the buyer. Okay? I'm going to show you real quick the workflow of how this appraisal happens, because you may not know. You may want to know. If you're a seller, you want to know. If you're a buyer, you may want to know. You may not care. But as a seller, if you're not in the know about what's going on with your home sale, usually it will bite you in the ass, because it's what you don't know that is always going to hurt you. So I love how this eraser just doesn't even work at all. There's new laws in place that do stop you and stop the lender from being able to pick whatever appraiser they want. We want to maintain objectivity here. You want to be able to tell. Everybody wants the government, really. The government does not want you tampering with that appraiser in any way. So what happens is you tell the lender that you want an appraisal done. And then the appraisal, the lender, here's the lender, here's you, if you're the buyer. Okay? Here's you, the buyer. You tell the lender you want an appraisal done. Then the lender calls this appraisal company, appraisal management firm, or something like that. And then what happens is then these people are there's some kind of a raffle that goes on, right? And then they pick, through a raffle, this appraiser. And here's John, the appraiser. And John's got his little clipboard out here. Okay, so that's how it works. You can't directly pick John. You can't directly pick John. The lender can't automatically pick John. That's not how the world works. You have to go through this channel, because it keeps a level of randomness about it, and it creates more objectivity. If you were able to pick your own appraiser, you would pick your buddy Bob, who would go out there and give you an appraisal that would be trash. If your lender was able to pick his buddy James, then James would come out there and give you an appraisal that would be trash. They would lie, and then the homes would be artificially inflated, and then everybody would make a lot of money, and then eventually we'd have a big financial problem in real estate, which has happened in the past. So that's why this is not the way that this is the new way. Okay. I think that's all I want to say about this, how this rolls. There's different kinds of there's different kinds of loans. We all know that. We've been working together long enough. You and I have been working long enough together. You know that there's a lot of different kinds of loans. I'll show you 3. So there's conventional, there's FHA, there's VA, there's others, but these are the 3 that we see the most, okay? Conventional, FHA, and VA. The unique thing that you need to know about these 3 is that the appraisals are different. They're handled differently. The risks, the inherent risks to you if you're a seller are different. The costs may be different. But let's take conventional first. A conventional appraisal is going to be the least stringent. It is different in that you will probably be less likely to have any kind of safety concern or habitability concern come up on a conventional appraisal. Just the standards are different than an FHA or a VA. Therefore, if you're a seller, a lot of sellers will want to pick a conventional buyer with a conventional loan because they don't want the extra risk associated with, having more conditions come up on their appraisal related to safety and inhabitability. FHA and VA are interesting because unlike conventional, there are some special there's some special things that can happen in the event that an FHA or a VA appraisal comes in low. Now, we haven't really talked about what happens if a conventional, if any of these appraisals come in low, what happens, okay? You're buying a home for $200,000, it only appraises at $190,000. What happens? The contract says $200,000, the appraisal says $190,000. What happens? Well, you don't have to buy it. If you're the buyer, you don't have to buy it. If you're the seller, you don't have to sell it. It's as easy as that. But you and the buyer have to renegotiate and figure out what to do. Are you going to meet in the middle, 50-50, or is the buyer going to absorb the entire thing and have to bring $10,000 to the closing table, or is the seller going to pay, take a loss of all $10,000? That's up to you, okay? But that's what we consider a low appraisal. It came in below the list price. It came in below, I should say, the contract price. So your $200,000 contract price, if it only appraises at $190,000, you have a low appraisal. The way a low appraisal is handled is different depending on what loan type you go with. So with a conventional loan, let's say worst case scenario, you're buying that $200,000 home, it appraises at $190,000, and you can't come up with a great negotiation with the seller that accommodates you both. And so you say, hey, Mr. Seller, I understand you don't want to part with your home for $190,000. Unfortunately, I don't have $10,000. I can't buy your home. I can't do this. I can't make this work. I'm going to cancel the contract. Okay? So with this one, the seller is able to put the property back on the market and sell it, and there really won't be any blemishes with the property. There's not going to be any lingering residue of a low appraisal stuck to that property. Not so with FHA and VA. So in the same circumstance, the same thing happens. It's a $200,000 purchase. It's a $190,000 appraisal. The same situation comes into play. The same buyer says, hey, Mr. Seller, I don't have $10,000. I'm going to have to walk away. Here's my cancellation. If that buyer was doing an FHA or a VA loan and he was doing an FHA or a VA appraisal, what happens is this is going to stick with the property, sometimes for as much as 120 days. That means if the seller goes to sell their home to another buyer who is a VA or an FHA buyer, they aren't going to be able to do their own independent appraisal. They're going to have to use the appraisal that's on file. So if this FHA buyer walks away because of a low appraisal, the next buyer comes in, he's an FHA buyer, the appraisal's already done. As a seller, you can understand why that might be a really big hassle for you, right? Because if you wanted $200,000 and you had a conventional, or so you had an FHA appraisal came in for 190, you've just lost everyone out there on the market that's an FHA buyer because you had a low appraisal. And so now you have to sell it to either a VA or a conventional buyer if you want $200,000. Or you can tell the buyer up front, hey, it's not going to appraise. Okay, so that's the unique thing about FHA and VA versus conventional. Here's the difference though. With VA, there's another really cool thing, which is if the appraiser feels like it's going to come in low, they have this thing called Tidewater. And I remember like the first time I heard about Tidewater, I thought it had something to do with there being a floodplain, but it's not actually that. What Tidewater is it's just, look at it, it's like a warning that they tell you ahead of time. And they say basically, hey, we're going to have a problem. We need more data. We need more information because we are going to have a problem here in a minute. And you need to provide additional data in order to allow us to submit a good VA appraisal. If you don't give us the additional data we need, then we'll go ahead and submit the $190,000 low appraisal and you guys can deal with it. This is actually a good thing. It actually saves a lot of people a lot of stress because you know that, who wants to go back and renegotiate because of a low appraisal? Probably no one. You're probably already packed up, ready to move into your new home. The seller's already packed up, ready to move out. The last thing you want to do is have a deal fall apart a couple days prior to closing over something like this. What happens when the VA or the FHA or conventional, whatever, they're all going to need, these appraisers, they all need data. They're all looking at, like I said earlier, the last 365 days. They're looking at comparable sales. It's a general practice, like it's a good practice in general to tell the appraiser ahead of time, hey, here are all the comparable sales. Here are all the market trends. Get them the information ahead of time and supply it to them. A lot of appraisers really appreciate that. Some don't. Some hate you for it. Some don't like dealing with real estate agents. They don't like dealing with the public at all. But most of these people do appreciate you being able to do your homework and provide them data that they may not have otherwise had. Maybe they missed a comparable sale. I mean, everybody's human. Just like real estate agents make mistakes, these appraisers can make mistakes. And by you matching up your comparable sales with theirs, a lot of times that can be the difference between saving what may otherwise be a low appraisal. Okay, so now let's get into the fun part because this is all this is all basic. What is not basic is when you start to apply these things to negotiations, because at the end of the day, everything that you're doing in real estate, whether you want to or not, like everything is a negotiation. When you're buying a home, you're selling a home, like you are negotiating. We're talking about cold hard cash here, and everybody's trying to get out and get theirs. That's what this is about. The lenders are trying to close the deal. The agents are trying to close the deal. The buyers are trying to get the house from you, and the sellers are trying to get your cash. So everything's a negotiation. And one of these days, I will get an eraser. So let's talk about a couple negotiating tips that you can use whenever you're doing an appraisal or you're anticipating problems with the appraisal. Here's a common one. Sellers who put a home on the market these days that is move-in ready, that is in a superior neighborhood, great schools, beautifully photographed, excellently marketed by a reputable brand, is going to have multiple offers if it's reasonably priced. That's just the nature of the market that we are in, okay? Doesn't matter if it's a $200,000 home or a $750,000 home. I've seen it even as of a few weeks ago. These homes just fly off the shelf with multiple offers. So when you have a home that is new to the market, right? And you've got maybe like 5 buyers, 5 separate buyers that all want the house. They've all made an offer. Everybody's got an offer. What tends to happen is that this let's just call it a $300,000 home. Well, he bid 300. He bid 305. He found out that there were 2 other offers, so he bid 307. This guy bid 308. Right? This guy bid 310. This guy got mad because he was the first offer in, and he feels like he's getting screwed now. So he goes back and he revises his offer. So now he's at 312. And this could go on. I mean, there's some listing agents, they just let this thing go on until it's like a bloodbath out there. But it'll go on until somebody blows the whistle and stops this thing, or there's a riot outside and somebody decides to do something crazy like burn the house down so nobody gets. I haven't seen that happen yet. I saw it happen once. That's another story. So that's a funny story, but I'll tell you another time. So eventually we're going to start getting into a danger zone where you can see this $312,000. You know, we started out at 300 and maybe it was priced well. So what do you do as a seller when you're looking at $312,000? Your instinct would tell you to go ahead and accept the highest offer. All other terms being the same, you would go with the $312,000 offer. But what would happen if the appraisal comes in at 300? Right? So if you have a $12,000 difference here, that's a lot of money to potentially lose. So as the seller, and me being the listing agent, have been the listing agent on many homes and had been put in this exact position trying to help sellers make a determination on basically risk management, which is a lot of what you do as a listing agent. Here is this is something that you can put in the contract, okay, to protect yourself as a seller, okay? And I will preface it by saying that I'm not an attorney and I'm not claiming to give you legal advice, and talk to an attorney, and if, you know, whatever disclaimer I have to make on this so that I'm not sued and Reese Nichols is not sued and my broker doesn't call me in the morning and tell me that I'm in trouble for giving people legal advice. Okay, I will venture to say that. But so now that we're all clear on that, here's something that you could use. You can tell this buyer that you can say, I'll accept your offer, and you could use this. Buyer, I'm not going to maybe write it all out, but I'll say, buyer and seller agree that if the home does not appraise if the home appraises for at least $310,000, then the buyer does not have the right to renegotiate. Buyer and seller, this is so important, guys, because it's not every day that I give you something that you can actually snip and use in a contract. But buyer and seller agree if property appraises for at least, and then whatever you want to put, buyer waives right to renegotiate, and then you could say pursuant to the appraisal portion of the contract. Okay? You can pick whatever number you want to pick. As the seller, you can tell them, hey, I love your 312 offer. I want this number I want to be protected here. So I want you to, hey, as long as it appraises for what you're trying to calculate is how much risk are you willing to take as a seller. as long as it appraises for 302, if it appraises for lower than 302, we can renegotiate or whatever. You want this number as the seller to be as low as possible, because the lower it is, the lower the likelihood that the buyer would be able to renegotiate. The buyer, on the other hand, would want that number to be as high as possible. So if you don't put this in there, then if the property is under contract for $312 and it appraises for $311,000, then the buyer and the seller get to renegotiate. The buyer doesn't have to buy the home. I actually heard of examples where what happens, this is what you don't want to have happen, and this is what you will have happen if you get played, because you have not been in this situation before, and you can just get played for a few grand. And what could happen is the home appraises for $311,000. It should have appraised for $312. We hope that it would have appraised for $312, but it only appraised for $311. So the buyer and the seller have to renegotiate. And the buyer says, I see the appraisal came in low. Yeah, it only appraised for $311,000. And then, so, he's thinking to himself, okay, this is the seller. And he's thinking to himself, okay, so what? So, we're out $1,000? That's no problem. I'm sure we can work it out. And the buyer says, yeah, it appraised for less. It appraised for $1,000 less. But actually, I want to get it for $5,000 less. And the contract allows me to renegotiate, so I'm going to go ahead and ask for $5,000 off, not $1,000. And the seller's going to say, wait a minute, I have to move in a week. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? It only came in at $311,000. You should ask for $311,000. And he's going to say, yeah, I'm thinking more in the 306, maybe 304 range. And if you don't want to work it out with me, then I'll just walk away from you and I'll take my earnest money back. So what do you say? Well, you don't want to have that happen, right? And I've seen it happen. And so the way you protect yourself against this unscrupulous potential buyer who's wanting to jab you for some of your profits is you make sure that the number here that you pick is the number that you could actually live with, And if the number appraises lower than this, then you're kind of on your own, but at least you've got some level of protection. So if something like this happens, he waives the right to be able to do this unless this appraisal came back at 301 or something lower than 302. Okay? The other thing, the reverse of this would be if you're buying a home, and this is an Edward specialty because I don't know of anybody that communicates with the listing agent more than I do when I'm trying to make an offer. So, when I'm writing an offer for a buyer, I want to know exactly what the seller's concerns are. I want to know exactly what the seller's thinking, and is the seller worried about, for example, an appraisal that's going to come in low. So imagine you are the buyer, or you have an agent who is the buyer, and you're on the phone and you say, what you do, I've got videos and stuff and I've done in the past of how to talk to the listing agent or talk to the seller and try to figure out what their concerns are so you can write an offer that is very appealing to them the first go around. So if you ask the buyer, or if you ask the seller, what are your concerns? And one of them is, well, we're not sure the home is going to appraise. Maybe it's a rural property. Maybe it's a property that's a unique property. Maybe it's kind of a one-of-a-kind thing. Could be, in Prairie Village, there's a lot of teardowns. Maybe this is a property that's, recently built and it's surrounded by homes that are older, 1970s homes, but this is a 2020 home. Could happen. But if the one of the concerns is, hey, I am afraid this home will not appraise for $300,000. And what you could do as a buyer is write the inverse of this. I mean, you could write this into the contract. You could say to the seller up front, listen, Mr. Seller, I understand your concern. You don't think the home may appraise for $300,000. I'm going to write a clause into the contract that says if the home appraises for at least $295,000, I'm willing to take it. I'm willing to take it, and I'm not going to renegotiate pursuant to the appraisal portion of the contract. I'm not gonna try to screw you like that. I understand that you were floating kind of on the high side when you listed this, and you probably think it's going to appraise a little bit low, so I'm willing to absorb that. And you can say that on the front end, and I have actually done that many times with success and got our offer accepted over people who didn't have that same insight. So here's the key though with that. So if you say buyer and seller agree if property appraises for at least $302,000, let's do the opposite, right? It's a $300,000 home. Like the house is $300,000. In our case, let's say if we're representing the buyer, or there's a buyer, you're the buyer, and you're writing this up on your initial offer to try to soften whatever kind of concern the seller has. You could say, hey, I'll take it even if it appraises at $295. I'll make up the difference to you. I'm not worried about it. Just remember this. Your loan is going to be based on $295 now. So if you were planning to buy this, here's your scenario, right? Here's your first scenario. Your first scenario was you were going to buy it at $300,000. You were going to put $10,000 down. So you were going to bring $30,000 in your for your down payment. You were going to originally bring $30,000 for your down payment. Okay? If the home does indeed appraise for at $295 rather than $300, and you have already agreed that you would take this property at $295, here's what it means to you financially. Well, to the seller, it's the same. The seller is going to make his $300,000, but the lender is going to change what they're willing to do for you. So you take now $300,000. In this case, you're going to put down the original 10%. You're going to put down the original $30,000. But the lender is only going to loan you on a loan to value of this $295. They're going to work your transaction, they're going to work your loan and everything as though they are giving you 90% of $295. So you're going to give, so I guess that math would be, I think we're off by a few pennies, but you would do 10% of $295,000. So this becomes $29,500. And then you have to come up with whatever the difference is. So you have to come up with the extra $5,000. So you would have to add $5,000 to whatever it was you were going to bring. So this becomes $34,500, right? So now this is how much you have to come, that's how much you have to come to the table with, if I did my math correctly on that. You have to come out of pocket that additional $5,000. If you don't have the money, then that becomes a problem for you. Okay, so you have to make sure that you know the funds up front. Edward Stephens with the Stephens Group at Reese Nichols. Quick recap here. Appraisals, you order them as the buyer. can be as late as maybe a couple weeks prior to closing. They do cost you money. They're usually non-negotiable. They usually are a requirement by your lender. And when you do it, you have to make sure that you have the right data. You give the right data, the right comparables to your appraiser, so your appraiser can get his data, match it up with your data, and give you an accurate appraisal. You will get that appraisal. You'll get that physical appraisal, that physical copy of the appraisal, and that has got to match or exceed the contract price. If it doesn't, if it comes in low, then you have the opportunity to renegotiate. And we even talked about one thing that you can do here to protect yourself if you're the seller, or the opposite of that would be one thing that you can do when you're initially making an offer in a multiple offer situation to make your offer stand out a little bit better than the competition's. And that's this right here, this thing that we just went over. Real briefly, I'll just say that this is probably the second most common question, and then I'll go ahead and wrap this video up. What happens if you're buying a home for $300,000 and it appraises at $310,000, for example? Well, as a buyer, you get instant equity. You get $10,000 in instant equity. That's what that means. You don't let the seller know that. The seller is not going to be notified by the appraiser or by you or by your agent that the property appraised for more. So you're not going to have to worry about that. That'll be a secret that's between you and your lender and your real estate agent. Okay? They're only going to be notified if it comes in for less than $300,000 or less than whatever contract price you agreed to. Edward Stephens here with the Stephens Group at Reese Nichols. If you have any questions about appraisals or if you are getting snagged or hung up in an appraisal, I do want to hear from you. So feel free to message me, and I look forward to seeing you one day at the closing table.